Hello, my name is Maelis Kane. I thought I knew who my allies were, until the night I learned every smile I trusted hid a knife. They didn't just try to take me down. They used the people I swore to protect as bait. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was patient, deliberate, waiting until I had nowhere left to run. And when the trap finally closed, it wasn't just my life on the line. Would you have seen it coming? The wind off the harbor cut straight through my coat as I stepped out of the taxi. It carried the sharp, briny scent of the Atlantic, the kind that usually reminded me of summers on my father's boat. But now, under a thin layer of snow, the familiar streets felt like they belonged to someone else. Windows glowed dimly in the fading light, the sidewalks mostly empty. I hadn't planned on coming back to Maine this winter. Work in Boston had been relentless, and I'd been telling myself that Dad understood. But then came the call, Sable's voice on the other end, tight and clipped. "Your father's in the hospital," she'd said, nothing more, no details, no warmth. The hospital sat on a rise above the harbor, its windows reflecting the last gold of the afternoon. I spotted her immediately at the entrance. Sable Kane, my stepmother. Tall, poised, her coat perfectly tailored, not a hair out of place despite the wind. She held herself like someone waiting to deliver news on her own terms. Inside, the corridors hummed with the low, steady beeping of machines. When I walked into Dad's room, the sight of him knocked the breath out of me. He lay still, his chest rising in shallow, rhythmic lifts under the hum of the ventilator. Tubes and wires connected him to monitors that blinked in quiet authority. "I'm overseeing all medical decisions," Sable said, her voice smooth, but with an edge that made it clear this was not up for discussion. She kept her phone in her hand the entire time she spoke, her thumb flicking across the screen as though my father's condition were just another item on her to-do list. I asked how it happened. She offered a short answer. Collapsed at home, probable stroke. And nothing more. The air between us thickened with things neither of us said. I noticed her manicure, the fresh polish glinting under the fluorescent lights, and wondered how she'd found the time for such detail today of all days. On my way out, I almost collided with Indira Park. She'd lived across the street from us for as long as I could remember. The kind of neighbor who brought chowder over in winter storms and kept your secrets without asking questions. But now she leaned in close, her voice dropping. "Maelis, something's not right," she whispered. "Your father, he was worried, said he might have trusted the wrong person." Her words lodged in my chest. I remembered a summer afternoon 2 years ago, sitting on the porch with Dad, his eyes on the horizon. "You've got to be careful who you put your trust in," he'd said then, without explaining why. The drive back to the house was silent except for the hum of the heater. I offered Sable a ride. She accepted with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. We passed landmarks that once felt like anchors. Gus's diner, now boarded up, the old hardware store with its windows dark. Even the town seemed to be holding its breath. I asked again about the night Dad collapsed. Sable's answers came smooth, rehearsed, as if she'd said them too many times already. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the unease inside me had settled into something heavier. Later, alone in my childhood bedroom, I let my gaze rest on the old cedar dresser, the scent of its wood wrapping around me like a memory. Faded photographs lined the walls, Dad holding me at the pier, me in my first raincoat, the one he bought me on a trip to Bar Harbor. I clenched my hands into fists. I needed to know what had happened to him, and I would, no matter what it took. When I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water, I stopped short. On the counter sat a manila folder, its top corner folded back just enough for me to see the hospital's letterhead. I reached for the file, my fingers trembling. The kitchen was dark except for the faint glow from the stove clock. The folder sat there, half open on the counter, its manila edges curled from use. I pulled it closer, my fingertips brushing over the paper like it might bite. The first page hit me like a cold slap. Arthur Kane, alert and responsive for 20 minutes after arrival. 20 minutes. Sable had sworn he never woke up. I turned the page. A note in the margin caught my eye, scrawled in black ink. Not a doctor's handwriting I recognized. Limit contact to primary next of kin. Primary, that meant Sable. The rest of us, me, were non-primary. My chest tightened. The refrigerator hummed in the silence. Then, suddenly, the sound of heels on tile. I slid the file halfway shut just as Sable appeared in the doorway. Her hair was perfect, like she'd just stepped out of a salon, not a hospital. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, voice syrupy but sharp around the edges. "I was making tea," I said, though the kettle was cold. Her gaze drifted to the file. "That's private," she said, stepping closer. "It was on the counter," I replied. "And it's about my father. I have a right to know." "I'm protecting Arthur's peace," she said, drawing out each word like it was a lecture. "You've always been emotional about these things." "Emotional?" I set the folder down but didn't let go. "He was conscious after the collapse. Why didn't you tell me?" A faint twitch rippled in her left hand. She smiled without warmth. "Doctors say a lot of things in the moment. You'd only dwell on it." Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she glanced down. "Get some rest, Maelis," she said, turning toward the stairs. I waited until she was gone before slipping into my old bedroom and shutting the door. The cedar smell was stronger here, pulling at memories I didn't have time for. I grabbed my phone and called Indira. "She's lying to you," Indira said before I even asked. 2 days before Arthur collapsed, I saw him in the hospital garden. He was talking to a man in a gray coat, looked tense. "That's impossible. He wasn't admitted yet." "I know what I saw," she said. "And check your bank. Remember that weird notification you told me about?" I sat on the edge of the bed, piecing it together. The timing matched. Later, after Sable's footsteps faded upstairs, I padded down the hall to my father's study. The door creaked, the smell of paper and dust spilling out. I pulled at the top desk drawer. It stopped short, locked. I crouched down, noticing tiny scratches around the keyhole. Someone had been in and out of it often. From the living room, muffled but sharp, Sable's voice carried through the quiet. She was on the phone, speaking fast, clipped, like she didn't want to be overheard. Back in my bed, I stared at the ceiling, every word she'd said looping through my head. I'd had enough of hints and half-truths. Tomorrow, I'd go straight to the hospital staff. I needed answers from someone who didn't have a stake in shutting me out. Sometime after midnight, the faint click of the front door pulled me upright. My heart thudded in my ears. I slipped out of bed, bare feet on the cold floor, following the soft crunch of footsteps on the snow. The air bit at my cheeks as soon as I stepped outside, the kind of cold that reached straight through wool and cotton. A thin layer of new snow sparkled under the porch light, and right there, leading away from the front steps, was a neat row of footprints, fresh, crisp. Whoever had come and gone hadn't been gone long. I didn't stop to think. I shoved my feet into boots, pulled my coat tight over my pajamas, and eased the door shut behind me. My breath puffed white in the early dawn light. Every crunch of my boots on the snow seemed too loud, so I slowed, placing each step inside the marks left ahead of me. The prints were longer than mine, spaced farther apart, a man's stride maybe. The trail wound down the driveway and along the narrow road that led toward the main street. The world was silent except for the faint hum of an idling engine somewhere up ahead. Rounding the bend, I saw it. A black SUV parked at the end of the road, exhaust curling into the frosty air. A tall figure stood beside it, leaning into the passenger seat. I caught the dull yellow flash of a manila envelope in their hands. They placed it carefully on the seat, shut the door, and for a moment just stood there. That's when my boot scraped against a patch of ice. They froze, shoulders stiffening. I took a step forward, heart pounding, the words forming in my throat before I could stop them. "Hey!" The figure spun toward me. For a split second, the porch light from a nearby house caught the glint of something hanging from their coat pocket, a plastic ID badge swinging on a retractable cord. My eyes went straight to it, the hospital logo. Without a word, they bolted, their feet spraying snow behind them. I lunged forward, following the deep prints they left in the drifts. My lungs burned from the cold air, my boots slipping on patches of packed snow, but I managed to close the gap enough to reach out. My hand caught the edge of their sleeve, a quick shove, hard enough to knock me back, and they were gone, vanishing into the dark outline of the woods. The SUV's engine revved. Instinct pushed me toward the vehicle before it could move. I yanked open the passenger door and grabbed the envelope off the seat. The interior smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, but before I could see anything else, the SUV lurched forward. I stumbled back, clutching the envelope to my chest as it sped off toward the highway. Back inside the kitchen, I laid the envelope on the table and pulled off my gloves. My fingers trembled as I slid out the papers inside. Medical intake forms, all stamped confidential. The first page stopped me cold. Visitor access restricted by SK. I didn't have to think twice about those initials. I dropped into a chair, the document spread in front of me. My mind was racing, connecting dots I didn't want to see. Someone from the hospital delivering papers to who and why at this hour? I reached for my phone and called Indira. She answered on the second ring, her voice husky with sleep. Maelis, what's wrong? I just caught someone outside. Black SUV, hospital ID. They dropped off an envelope with restricted access forms. SK Indira. A pause, then more awake. That's bad, really bad. I'll check the hospital system before you get here today. Quietly. Please, I think I'm closer than I should be. When we hung up, I stared at the papers again, the words blurring for a moment. I had proof now. Not enough to act, but enough to know this wasn't paranoia. I was about to put the documents away when my phone lit up. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short, the kind of thing you'd see in a cheap thriller, only this wasn't fiction. Stop digging, Maelis. Last warning. I read it twice, then a third time. My grip tightened around the phone. Whoever sent it wasn't bluffing, and I had a feeling they were already watching. The glow from my phone felt too bright in the dim kitchen, the words still burning into my mind. Stop digging, Maelis. Last warning. It wasn't just a threat. It was written like the sender knew me, maybe even close enough to understand exactly what would make me pause. I read it again, searching for anything that could tell me more. No typos, no punctuation except that single period at the end. Cold, final. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but I could already imagine their questions, the blank expressions when I handed over a number with no name, no proof, and a stack of hospital forms I wasn't supposed to have. All it would do is alert whoever sent this that I'd gone public, and I wasn't ready to lose the element of surprise. Instead, I dialed Indira. Morning, she said, voice low, as if she'd already been awake. We need to meet, in person, somewhere quiet. Diner. Outskirts of town, less eyes, she replied without hesitation. Half an hour? The drive out felt longer than it should have. The snowstorm had eased, leaving behind gray slush on the streets. The tires made a soft, steady hiss over the wet pavement, and every passing car had me checking the rearview mirror. The diner's parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 pickup trucks and a sedan parked under a leaning lamppost. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee hit me instantly. Booths were lined along the windows, most of them empty, except one in the far corner. A woman sat there, alone, stirring a mug of tea. She didn't look away when our eyes met. Indira waved me over to a booth near the middle. She had her laptop open, but her body was angled so her back faced the door. I ran through the hospital's visitor logs, she began. On 3 separate days, 2 before your father's collapse, 1 after, records were altered, entire entries deleted or replaced. And the override came from someone high up. High up like Sable's attorney. Her voice tightened. And there's another name, Dr. M. Loran. Ever hear of him? I shook my head. No, Dad never mentioned him. Well, according to the logs, Dr. Loran had private consultations with your father in the week before all this. They're locked under legal privilege. Before I could respond, Indira excused herself to take a call, stepping toward the counter. That's when I noticed the woman from the corner booth moving toward me. She didn't speak. She just placed a folded napkin on the table and walked straight out the door. I glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. Slowly, I unfolded the napkin. Your father is not where you think. Follow the lake road. Midnight. My pulse kicked hard. I looked toward the window, but she was gone. Just the cold blue of the parking lot and the wind catching snow in little swirls. When Indira returned, I slid the napkin to her. "Could be a trap," she said flatly. "I know. But if it's real, I can't ignore it." We talked through it, what I'd take, what precautions I'd set. A flashlight, my phone recorder, and the small pocket knife my father used to carry, now tucked into my coat pocket. By the time I left the diner, the morning had brightened to a pale, cloudy gray. I was halfway to my car when I noticed it, a black SUV idling across the street. Its headlights flickered twice, like a signal meant only for me. The SUV's engine purred low, a steady rumble under the quiet street. I stayed still by my car, one hand on the door handle, the other buried deep in my coat pocket where the pocket knife rested. The headlights blinked twice again, slow, deliberate. I weighed my options. Walk away and pretend I never saw it, or see who was inside and risk that this was the trap Indira had warned me about. The passenger side window rolled down just enough for a gloved hand to emerge, palm up in a gesture that was neither threatening nor welcoming, just beckoning. I crossed the street slowly, boots crunching on the frozen slush. My breath came out in small clouds, each one feeling louder than the last. The driver's face stayed in shadow, but when they spoke, the voice was low and male. "You don't know me, Maelis, but I know who you're looking for." That caught me off guard. "Then talk. I'm listening." He glanced around, as if expecting someone to be watching. Not here. Too many ears. He slid a small flash drive across the window ledge. "This has footage you need. Hospital security won't have it in their system anymore." I hesitated, my fingers brushing the cold metal. "Why give this to me?" "Because if you keep going the way you are, you'll end up just like him." Before I could press for more, the SUV pulled away, tires hissing over the wet asphalt. I looked down. The flash drive was already burning cold in my palm. Back inside my car, I plugged it into my laptop. A single video file appeared. Grainy, black and white security footage showed my father in a wheelchair in the hospital garden, 2 days before his collapse. Sable stood beside him, speaking to a man in a long coat. No audio, but my father's expression was tight, his hands clenching the armrests. The man in the coat slipped something into Sable's purse. She glanced around, then wheeled my father back inside. I replayed it 3 times, each time noticing more, the stiffness in my father's movements, the way Sable avoided eye contact with him, the faint timestamp matching the day Indira had mentioned. The knock at my car window nearly made me drop the laptop. Indira stood outside, her coat dusted with snow. I hadn't even noticed her pull up. "We need to talk," she said the moment I opened the door. "I found out where Dr. Loran is meeting people off record. It's on the lake road." The same place the napkin had told me to be. "Midnight," I whispered. We exchanged a look, half warning, half unspoken agreement. This wasn't coincidence. Whatever was waiting for me on the lake road was the key. Or the end. The storm had eased, but the wind still combed through the bare trees outside, rattling the old panes of the Kane house like impatient fingers. I had just set my mug on the kitchen counter when it came. 3 faint knocks, deliberate, spaced evenly apart. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but then came the voice. "May, it's me." My breath hitched. It wasn't just any voice, it was my father's. That warm baritone, lined with years of salt air and stubborn pride. And then, the kicker. "Little Minnow," he said, using the nickname only he and I shared, the one from our winter fishing trips when I was 10. Every hair on my arms rose. My father was in a hospital bed miles away, monitored around the clock. He couldn't stand, let alone come to my front door in the middle of the night. "Dad?" My voice cracked, shamefully thin. "How? Where?" No answer at first, just the wind pressing against the siding. Then, again, that same strained, urgent tone. "Please, May. Let me in. I took one slow step toward the door. My hand hovered over the first deadbolt. Don't. Indira's voice came from the hallway. She was barefoot, eyes wide, one hand gripping the frame of the doorway. You can't open it. Not until we know. It's his voice, Indira. He knew. I don't care if he quoted your kindergarten lunch order. He's hooked up to machines, Maelis. He can't be here. The logic snapped into place like ice underfoot. My instincts screamed at me to check the peephole. I leaned forward. Nothing. Just the hallway swallowed in shadows. No figure, no shape blocking the light from the porch. Then the voice again, closer. May, please. It's cold. I froze, listening harder. The sound wasn't vibrating through the wood the way a real person's voice would. It was flat, tinny, like a recording playing too close to the speaker. Indira's eyes darted to the crack under the door. No shadow. That's not him, she whispered. It's bait. My stomach turned. The file, the SUV, the napkin at the diner. This was the next move. I stepped back fast, signaling for Indira to grab her phone. Call the sheriff's dispatcher. Now. She was halfway to dialing when the light above the porch flickered twice, then died completely, plunging the hallway into darkness. We both went still. A slow, deliberate scraping began on the outside of the door. Not fingernails, not wood on wood, metal. The scrape stopped. Silence. Then, a single, unmistakable metallic click. The sound of a key turning in my lock. Maelis Kane, when the locks gave way. The metallic click from moments ago wasn't my imagination. It deepened into the grinding twist of the knob, slow at first, then harder, as if whoever stood outside was testing the give of the old brass hardware. I lunged for the chain lock, shoving my shoulder against the wood just as the frame shuddered. A sharp jolt rattled through me. The door jumped in its hinges. Still no signal, Indira whispered from behind me, phone pressed to her ear. It's like the lines blocked. Another slam hit the door, this time harder, making the chain snap taut with a metallic whine. Through the thin seam, I caught a flicker of movement, broad shoulders, taller than my father, moving with a deliberate stillness that chilled me more than the storm outside. Who's there? My voice cut sharper than I meant it to. Silence answered. The door slammed again, rattling the frame. I planted both feet, braced for another hit. That's when I heard it. A click, soft and precise, but not from the door. It came from my bedroom. I froze. Indira's eyes widened in recognition before I even spoke. I mouthed, "Someone's already inside." I grabbed the nearest thing with weight, an old ceramic lamp from the entryway table, and motioned for her to stay back near the kitchen. My heart thudded in my throat as I edged toward the bedroom doorway. A shadow detached from the darkness and stepped forward. He wore dark tactical clothing, a mask pulled low over his face, and gloves that made no sound against the hardwood. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze swept the room like he'd been here before. The pounding at the front door stopped. Silence spread like a held breath. "Who sent you?" My voice was steady, but my grip on the lamp tightened until my knuckles ached. No answer, just a slow turn of his head toward the kitchen where Indira stood frozen. A sudden shout from her made me whirl. "The porch light's back on!" I darted to the front window and peered out. A man stood there in a security-style uniform, but the badge under the porch light didn't match any department in town. The lettering was wrong, the crest unfamiliar, private hire, not law enforcement. It hit me all at once. Whoever was outside and the masked man inside weren't two separate threats. They were working together. The man in the mask stepped toward Indira. I had 1 second to decide, attack or run. I didn't think. I moved. The storm outside was still screaming against the glass, but inside, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Fast, shallow, and counting the seconds. The masked man stood between me and Indira, his black-clad frame filling the narrow gap of the living room. Behind the door, the fake guard's voice barked another order, loud enough to cut through the wind. My pulse thudded against my temples. I froze for half a second, long enough to weigh the impossible choice. If I lunged now, I might buy Indira time. If I hesitated, we were both done. Indira's wide eyes locked onto mine, searching for instruction. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage, praying she'd understand. The man shifted his stance, knees bent, weight forward. That was my opening. I stepped in like I was going for his head, then swung low. The lamp connected with his knee in a sickening thud. He grunted, stumbling sideways. "Go!" I shouted at Indira, shoving her toward the kitchen exit. From the hallway, the guard slammed a fist into the door again. "Open up! Security check!" The words had all the right urgency, but none of the tone. His cadence was off, too clipped, too rehearsed. Indira stopped mid-step, glancing back. "You mean hide or—" "Out!" I barked, but the hesitation had already cost us. The masked man straightened, weight shifting forward again. Before he could close the gap, the guard outside yelled a string of numbers and letters, some kind of code. The intruder froze for just a second, head cocking toward the door. That pause was my lifeline. I grabbed Indira's wrist and yanked her toward the fire escape door. The man lunged, but I slammed my shoulder into his chest, sending us both crashing into the side table. Glass shattered under us, the fragments glittering in the emergency light. Indira pushed the door open, and the storm punched its way inside, rain and wind swirling into the apartment. We stumbled onto the metal steps, the cold cutting through my sweat-damp clothes. And then, movement. A figure emerged from the shadows below, a flashlight beam catching on rain-slick metal. My muscles tensed until I recognized the face. Mrs. Alvarez, my downstairs neighbor. She was drenched, her hair plastered to her forehead, but her eyes were fierce. "Came to check on you. Saw him," she said, jerking her chin toward the masked man now framed in the doorway. Without hesitation, she stepped past me, grabbing the fire extinguisher mounted to the railing. The blast of white powder caught him square in the face. He stumbled back, coughing and swiping at his mask. "Move!" Mrs. Alvarez shouted. "You've got maybe 20 seconds." We clattered down the last steps 2 at a time, rainwater splashing under our feet. My chest was burning from cold and adrenaline, but we were almost clear. Until the guard's voice came from directly ahead, low, calm, and waiting. "Well," he said, blocking the bottom landing, "that's far enough. We weren't out yet, not even close." Rain poured off the edge of the fire escape, cascading in cold sheets onto the alley below. My boots hit the pavement hard, sending a splash up my jeans, and I instinctively pulled Indira behind me. The fake guard stood at the base of the stairs, his stance loose but purposeful, one gloved hand resting near his belt. "Mrs. Alvarez stepped up beside me without a word, the fire extinguisher still in her grip. The 3 of us stood there in a tight triangle, breath clouding in the freezing air, rainwater pooling at our feet. The alley was narrow, the brick walls pressing in, making every sound sharper, the wind's howl, the metallic drip from the gutters, the steady beat of my own pulse. I took one slow step forward. "Badge. Now," I said. The man didn't move. His head tilted slightly, the bill of his cap shadowing his eyes. The silence stretched for a beat too long. Every real security officer I'd ever met could produce credentials in under 3 seconds. A faint scraping sound echoed from behind us, from the street end of the alley. I flicked my gaze that way, nothing but the shifting shadow of rain through the dim light. My grip on Indira's sleeve tightened. The guard shifted, tugging at the brim of his cap. For just a moment, the cuff of his sleeve pulled back, and I saw it, the curling tip of a black ink tattoo, sharp-edged and unmistakable. My lungs went still. I knew that design, had memorized it years ago during a debrief on covert paramilitary operators. This wasn't random. This was connected. I felt Indira's hand clutch the back of my jacket, sensing the change in my posture even before I said anything. Mrs. Alvarez's gaze flicked between us, her knuckles whitening on the extinguisher. "We go for the street," she whispered. I started to nod, then froze. In the washed-out glow of the street lamp, I caught the blur of movement at the far end. A shadow flitted back into the deeper dark as soon as my eyes landed on it. They weren't blocking us here to stop us. They were funneling us, herding us exactly where they wanted. I scanned the guard, looking for weapons, and that's when I saw it. Just a faint blink of red light, peeking from under the cuff of Indira's coat. My stomach dropped. Indira. I stepped closer, catching her arm. The tiny device was no bigger than a shirt button, clamped onto the inner seam like it belonged there. A tracker. They don't care where they grab us, I said, my voice low. They just want to know where we run to. Her eyes went wide, and Mrs. Alvarez swore under her breath. The guard took a slow step forward. The shadow at the street edge waited. The rain fell harder, masking my whisper as I leaned to Indira. We're not going home, I said. We're not going anywhere they expect. The boathouse loomed out of the fog like a ghost from another life, its paint blistered, roofline sagging, and a warped wooden door barely hanging on its hinges. I guided Indira and Mrs. Alvarez along a narrow side path, avoiding the road. Every step squelched in the damp earth, and the salt wind from the harbor stung my cheeks. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and brine. The planks underfoot creaked in slow protest. I set the small oil lamp on an overturned crate, letting its dim amber glow spill just far enough to show us the corners of the room. Indira sank down beside it, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Mrs. Alvarez stood watch near the door while I scanned for exits. 2 doors, one to the front, and a narrow service hatch at the back, both questionable. That's when I saw it, a folded scrap of paper wedged between the door frame and the wall. My name wasn't on it, but I didn't need it to be. The tight, slanted script was burned into my memory. Stay here. Wait for dawn. The whisper. A contact from my intelligence days who had saved my life more than once. Mrs. Alvarez read it over my shoulder and gave a small, relieved sigh. If he says it's safe, we're fine till morning. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But my gut stayed tight. While they settled, I moved toward a tarp in the corner, hoping for blankets or supplies. Instead, I found an old battery-powered radio half buried under rope. Faint static hissed through the speaker. Then, between bursts of white noise, a clipped voice reading coordinates, our coordinates. My skin prickled. I flipped the tuning dial slowly, searching for a break in the static. The cadence of the numbers was familiar. Too familiar. An old cipher pattern the Whisper and I had once used for field extractions. Only now, the pattern was wrong. Reversed. Not for rescue, for delivery. He wasn't just keeping tabs. He was feeding our location to both sides. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and turned off the radio. Searching for anything useful, I ducked into the side storage room. That's where I saw them. Boot prints in the dust. Fresh, wide set, heavier than any of ours. My pulse kicked harder. I crossed to a warped wall panel, pressing my eye to a crack in the boards. Outside in the fog, a silhouette stood perfectly still, not approaching, not leaving. I'm just watching. This wasn't a safe house. It was a holding pen. I moved fast, shaking Indira awake and signaling Mrs. Alvarez to grab anything we could use. The lamp's glow wavered as I pinched it out, drowning us in shadow. My hand found the cold, corroded curve of a boat hook leaning by the hatch. We slipped to the back door, the boards groaning under our weight. The metal latch lifted with a soft click. Then, from behind us, a faint crunch of footsteps. A shadow spilled across the doorway. My grip tightened on the boat hook. The rusted boat hook felt heavier than it should, slick with the damp air. My grip tightened as the sound of footsteps came. Slow, deliberate, crunching against the damp wooden planks. Whoever it was didn't hurry. They didn't have to. I froze halfway between the back door and the dock, every sense straining. Fog pressed in thick around the boathouse, curling through the doorway in ghostly tendrils. The faint light from the oil lamp inside was barely enough to catch the shape of the shadow standing just beyond the threshold. It didn't move. That stillness. It wasn't uncertainty. It was confidence. Behind me, I heard Indira's breathing quicken. A slight tremor in the sound told me she was fighting panic. I gave her a sharp hand signal. Stay back." She froze in place, eyes locked on me. The neighbor shifted his stance beside her, his own weapon, a broken length of oar, ready, but I could feel his hesitation. The figure took one more step forward, boots creaking against wet wood, and then, in a low, steady voice, it spoke. Orchid. My code name. No one had called me that in years, not since the old intelligence days, before I traded dead drops and coded transmissions for a quieter life. The sound of it slammed into me like a cold wave, every nerve firing at once. I felt the weight of history in that single word, the ghosts of missions and choices I thought I'd left behind. I stepped forward, boat hook still raised. "Who's asking?" My voice came out steady, but I knew they'd hear the steel in it. The figure reached up, fingers tugging back the hood of the heavy coat. The breath caught in my chest. It wasn't just anyone, it was Callan Drake. We had worked side by side in some of the darkest corners of the map. I had trusted him with my life more times than I could count. And now he stood here, eyes flat, expression unreadable, working for the Whisper's rivals. Betrayal didn't even feel like the right word. It was deeper, colder. "It didn't have to be this way," he said. "It was always going to be this way," I replied. For a moment, the fog between us felt like the years we'd been apart, dense, impenetrable, heavy with things unsaid. Then he gave me the offer. "You have two options, Orchid. Hand over the girl and your friend, and I'll see to it you get out of the city alive. Refuse, and you won't make it to sunrise." He didn't raise his voice. Yet he didn't have to. The calm way he said it made the threat more real than any shouted ultimatum. I felt Indira move closer behind me, her fingers finding the back of my jacket. The silent plea was unmistakable. "Don't leave me." Inside, my mind ran the calculus. Routes out, his line of sight, the distance to the dock's edge, the neighbor's readiness, the unknowns in the fog. Every option carried risk, and none of them guaranteed survival. "I need a moment," I said, buying seconds, my stance shifting subtly toward the edge of the dock. Callan's eyes narrowed. He knew me well enough to sense movement in my head before it reached my body. Behind me, the neighbor caught my glance and gave the slightest nod. The harbor horn blared in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that rolled through the fog like thunder. I moved on the beat, lunging forward, swinging the boat hook low toward Callan's knees. He staggered, one boot slipping on the slick planks. I didn't wait. "Move!" I barked at Indira and the neighbor. We bolted into the fog, feet pounding the dock, rain stinging against my face. Behind us came the sharp report of a gunshot. Pain bloomed in my shoulder like fire, but I didn't slow. We had one chance to disappear before the hunter closed in again. The sodium lights bled a dull orange haze into the mist, each halo swallowed by the cavernous dark of the abandoned grain warehouse. My boots echoed on the cracked concrete floor as we were herded inside. Indira pressed close to my uninjured side, the neighbor just a step behind, his coat concealing the bulge of the shotgun. The Whisper waited at the center, hands clasped loosely behind his back, his smile cutting sharper than any blade. "I told them you'd fight," he said, voice smooth and amused. "But eventually, you'd understand there's only one end to this." He circled us slowly, recounting every step, every manipulated choice, from the tracker on Indira to the boathouse note. I let my shoulders sag, the wounded one throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I wanted him to believe I was finally beaten. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the beacon clipped inside my belt, the silent trigger pressing beneath my thumb. One click, no turning back. He kept talking. I kept breathing slow. Then the shift came. He bragged about choosing this location because law enforcement would never get close. He didn't know it sat inside a perimeter secured hours ago by people I'd quietly summoned. People who'd waited for my signal. The first sharp crack of gunfire was distant. But it changed everything. A faint vibration shuddered through the warehouse walls. Somewhere outside, the explosives his men had planted to seal us in were now sealing them out. He looked toward the sound. I moved. The hidden blade in my palm slid cleanly across the first enforcer's forearm, sending his pistol clattering. Indira, steady despite the fear, yanked a flare from her coat and snapped it to life, blinding the second man long enough for the neighbor to slam him to the ground. The whisper bolted toward a side door, but he never made it. My neighbor stepped into the frame, shotgun leveled, eyes cold. "End of the road," I said, and the words tasted like the years of betrayal they carried. I dragged him toward the main doors just as the perimeter lights flared to life. Press drones swarmed through the air like locusts, lenses catching every detail. Uniformed operatives and law enforcement poured inside, their shouts echoing. "Smile for the world," I told him, shoving him forward. The cameras caught his face, the name on his forged credentials, the damning evidence streaming from the device I'd planted on him earlier. For the first time that night, the whisper's composure cracked. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They cuffed him under the glare of 100 lenses. And then it was quiet. Indira's arms wrapped around me, warm despite the cold. "You didn't let them win," she whispered. The neighbor just nodded once, respect heavy in his gaze. Outside, the dawn was breaking, the fog lifting in thin ribbons over the harbor. I walked toward the pier, shoulder aching, blood drying stiff on my sleeve. It wasn't victory I felt, only survival. The cost was etched into every breath, but the air was mine again, and I was walking free. Looking back on that night, I realized survival isn't just about strength. It's about knowing when to fight, when to wait, and when to turn the tables. I learned that betrayal can come from the faces you once trusted, but so can unexpected help from those you barely knew. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Never hand over your power, no matter how cornered you feel. Stand your ground, even if your hands are shaking. Life will throw you into storms you never asked for, but those moments are also your chance to define who you are. I stood in that warehouse because I refused to let fear dictate my choices, and you can do the same in your own battles, whatever they may be. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for yourself, even when the odds were stacked against you? Share your story in the comments. If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 below or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't, tell me why. I'm listening. And if you want more real stories of resilience, courage, and the fight for truth, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next.